Need to hit the button. Good job. All right. Yeah. Well, welcome everybody to maybe the fourth installment of the Finding Good podcast. Yeah, nice. So kind of an evolving process, but just so everybody's on the same page here, really what we're trying to do in this podcast isn't teach everybody everything behind transformational listening and what we do with that process, but rather give some real life examples of how we can take an everyday conversation and turn it to a much more powerful, or what we call a transformational experience. How we can use simple questions, like just altering simple questions in a conversation, can give us access to people's stories, to the things people care about, and leave both people feeling a little better, and most importantly, feeling a little more connected. And so there's a ton of science behind that I will do my best not to jump down some nerd rabbit holes, because I love this stuff and I can talk all day about it. But the point of the podcast here today is to actually see some of it in action. And to do that, we're going to go through our, what we call the question of the week outline. Bree's going to walk us through. So every week in the membership, we give, or in the community rather, we put together a question of the week. So it's a question designed with our process in mind, with a transformational listening process in mind, some science on there, and then a little structure for how to have these conversations so that that connection happens. And this week, what a question. You can do share screen, Bree, or I can, I have it up here. But the question of the week this week is great. So I won't steal Bree's thunder here, but Bree, you want to walk us through the question of the week outline?
Yes. So I'm on a new computer and it's not letting me share my screen.
No worries.
Yes.
We can't have two people that don't know anything about technology. Well, you know plenty about technology, but I'm usually deficient. All right. So here, y'all can see that, yeah? Am I on the right screen? It's a question.
That's perfect.
Yep. Awesome. All right. Go ahead and walk us through this, Bree.
Awesome. Okay. So our question of the week this week is, what put a smile on your face? The reason that we have this question is based on the benefits of what happens to us when we smile in general. Number of physical health benefits, but then a number of emotional benefits as well, or mental health benefits. I refer to a study that we have here from the University of Western Australia talking about how the science of a smile can actually impact how we're doing on a daily basis. So when we ask someone this question, there's a couple things that are going to happen. First off, we can't help but smile when we're actually having this conversation, both parties, the person asking the question, as well as the person that is receiving the question. Because when I'm the person asking the question, I can't help but kind of put myself in their shoes, feeling the way that they're feeling. Like, I'm going to try to dig in to understand, and I'm probably going to have, we're allowed to swear again, right, Brian?
Yes, sure.
I'm going to have a shit-eating grin on my face while I'm going through this question asking process. So this is going to be great for me as the question asker, but then for the other person that's going through this, through the questions, they're experiencing the questions, and going through their responses, we're helping them have that physical, emotional benefit as well. And what can happen is when we're having this conversation with them, we're actually going to be trying to figure out, what was it that led to it? Why did it happen? How can we create more of that in your life? And that's going to help them kind of build new pathways in their brain of trying to get some more smiles in their face. Anything else that I should cover on that one, Brian? Should I go through the process?
No, I think the process is there and outlined, and I like we try to tie all of the questions to science or to like what is the scientific benefit of actually experiencing this feeling, because part of why we're asking is to actually generate those positive emotions, if you will, in the interaction, right? And it's actually about like how do we go back and look at past events, knowing that our brain individually by ourselves, anything that happens in your week, your brain has a negativity bias. So when you think about what you did today, your brain is naturally going to start thinking about what you could have improved, what you could have done well, or what you could have done better, what you fell short on. Like that's its kind of survival mode. But when we interact like this, we actually allow our brain to see, here's what I did well, here is the positive experience I had, those sorts of things, and we're amplifying that. And so the benefit to both people is that it's like, I think we explained it in transformational listening the other day, is like, it's the same reason you go on Netflix to watch a movie. Only what's happening here is you're getting the movie from the other person. And so there's this weird technique of like being kind of selfish in the questions you're asking. Like, I'm looking for where you smiled last week, because that's giving me information on where I might smile, but it's also at the base level kind of entertaining. Like I'm really interested in your story, because I know, just like watching a story on Netflix, your story is going to impact me. And the beauty of the science in that is when we connect on that story, that's where we actually connect as human beings. Now, we're not going to jump through all the science in there, because I'd start talking now and I'd start talking about 5 o'clock today. But rather, as you notice on the outline there is a structure that we give folks. And in the membership, each week we have Finding Good sessions, and that's where you get oftentimes with a stranger, sometimes it's with people you know. And they're 10-minute conversations where the job of the person asking questions is they can only continue to ask questions. No sofa, suggestions, opinion, feedback, or advice. And then the other person gets the chance to do it as well. That's what we're going to try here. So looking for a volunteer, and you can volunteer by like physically raising your hand or putting the little hand sign up in there. And what you're volunteering for, just so you're clear, because your brain is like, well, I'm not going to volunteer if I don't know what's coming, is I'm going to just start with that question that Bree read in last week, when have you smiled? And then I'm going to spend just 3 or 4 minutes finding out about that story, so that people can see how a simple question can actually like kind of create this experience. So Lisa, I've got you in the background because we had you last week or the week before. So Lisa's there if we need. And what I'm looking for is somebody that hasn't tried it yet. So Jen, Janine, and Hillary, you all have your cameras on. Ooh, Jen, you take yourself off and mute. It's like an auction, like you just volunteered yourself. All right. Awesome. Jen, how are you today?
I'm doing all right. How about you, Brian?
Fantastic. Thank you for asking. And where are you calling in from?
I am in Granite City, Illinois, just outside of St. Louis, Missouri.
Oh, fair. Well, good to have you. And I love saying like, where are you calling in from? Because like my dream is to just have a radio show. So this is like the active radio show here. All right. So Jen, what's going to happen is for roughly 4 minutes, I'm going to ask questions. But what I want to set the stage for is, especially because we're doing these in an open environment here, if I ask you a question that you're in any way uncomfortable answering, just, you can just say, you can give me a hand sign, or you can just say like, hey, give me a different question. What I promise to do is we're going to be focused on that initial question. Where have you smiled this week? And I'll try not to take the conversation outside of whatever story we end up hearing. Is that sound fair? All right, so let's get it started. Jen, what is it that put a smile on your face this week?
My little girl put a smile on my face yesterday when she said, I just want to wear my unicorn horn. My daughter loves unicorns, and she really just gets this look of joy on her face. And one of the things I'm trying to do as a mindful, conscious human is pay attention to my kid, where she's at, want to play on the floor with her. And I find I smile a lot more and I laugh a lot more when I'm hanging out with my kid.
Yeah. So in that moment, so was it yesterday that there was a unicorn horn?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm just getting the picture of is it a white one, or is it like colored? Like,
actually, it's a blue headband and it had a silver horn.
The visual is important on this one for me, if nothing else, right? But so this might sound like a kind of obvious question, but like, what is it in that moment that caused you to smile?
I think it's her rapturous, unfettered joy about the fact that now she has this unicorn horn, right? Like she didn't have it before, she has it now. She's very excited. And while I do my best to keep that level of joy as an adult, it kind of falls away a little, depends on how the day is going. Add a little stress, a little less joy, a little stress, a little less joy.
What did that rapturous joy look like in that moment? Tell me about.
A big smile. She laughed a lot. She had her hands up. She was just dancing and happy.
And when that was happening, when you say this joy, like how did that joy like feel in the moment? Like what did you experience? What was your felt experience in that moment?
I was just happy she was so happy.
Yeah. And so you were happy, she was happy, but was there like it sounds like there was like a contagion going on or something, right? Because as you explained it, you just laughed again, right? Like,
I did, yeah. It was a fun moment. She's full of joy. Sometimes we joke we should have named her Joy, and I still love Vivian as her name, so it'll work.
When in that moment, what do you think you had more of?
What do I think I had more of? Joy or?
Yeah, so if it was joy, what is that? And again, this sounds a little redundant, but like what does joy give you more of that you didn't have 3 moments ago, 3 moments before that?
A falling away of the pressures of the day, being in that moment, having that in the moment, being present, really being present.
And when you're able to be present, like what would you say that says about you that you were able to be present?
That I'm my most authentic self, that I'm at my most vulnerable, living my best life with my kid. It also causes me to have a little bit of joy as I move to whatever is next while I'm in that moment with her.
And one last question, because you talk about this with your daughter, being present in that moment, how would you describe yourself as a mother? Like what type of mother values being present in the moment?
I would say a good mother. One of my mantras when things are not so joyous is I'm a good mother listens. And so thinking about being present, it's all about listening.
So it sounds like this whole thing was like a moment, like you smiling in that moment was you smiling while you were being a good mother.
Yeah.
Nice. Everybody, a round of applause. Nice work, Jen. Yeah, we haven't killed anybody yet, so that's good. We try to keep that bar. So in the conversation, like there was a few things happening, and I try not to break down all of like how you go into the conversation, but I'm curious, and I always start with the person who was asked the question. Jen, and I'll ask it this way, Jen, what was the benefit for you from your perspective? How did that conversation, if at all, benefit you?
Really breaking it down and enjoying a moment that felt pretty fleeting.
Yeah, and what does breaking it down kind of give you think?
I guess it helps you understand more about what was good about the moment, not just, oh, that was a fun moment with my daughters. Like, oh, I was smiling, I was happy, she was happy. And there's deeper connotations, right? It's like I'm showing her I'm a good mom, I'm showing myself I'm a good mom. Having that reminder is really good. Yeah,
because there's plenty of moments that give us a different reminder. Is that a fair statement? There's no shortage of opportunities for like, oh, I'm not, but like being in not having that moment becomes pretty important. I'm curious, so tossing it out to the rest of anybody else on here, and again, you can take yourself off a chat and either ask a question or make a comment or do it on the chat. But what did the rest of you notice? What did you notice maybe about everything from about the questions to what was potentially beneficial both for Jen, and my favorite question is, what was the benefit to me in that conversation? Like, how did I benefit from that conversation? Not everybody at once. Go ahead, Hillary. Go ahead. Yeah. Take yourself off of mute, though. Oh, Hillary, you're on mute. I couldn't hear you.
I just said I was mulling.
Oh, no worries.
Finding the words. What was helpful for me is that the conversation and the kind of drilling down of, what was that joy takes me to like core drivers or core sources of not just feeling, but I was going to use the word values, but it's not values. I'm a word mongrel, so it's real important to get the right colors because that's how words are for me. But it's just that sense of, it's kind of like a core, for me, it will be a core foundation pole, right? It's just like when you are authentic, that brings you, and it just, that's as good as the words I can give today. But then it brings you down to that center, and it's out of that center, that driver, that all of that occurs. So when I thought about the challenging moments as a parent, and I'm a parent and grandparent, it's maintaining the authenticity in the painful moments.
Yeah, there's something about like, hearing Jen's story that like, and the word we use is permission, right? Like in hearing Jen's story, like now I have more permission to own when I'm in a similar experience, right? Like to like, oh, like, and that's a weird kind of counterintuitive, but like I'm giving myself permission to actually enjoy this thing. Like I'm feeling joyful in here on, and even the really brave thing Jen did, which was, I'm a good parent, right? That's super scary to say out loud to a bunch of strangers, right? Like the potential for rejection in a statement like that is high. But also like, that's the importance of the conversation, is like, now I got to say it out loud. And not only does it help Jen feel better, but like, then someone else is like, oh, maybe it's okay to actually accept that in me, because now I have this story to reference, right? Like you're hitting exactly like what took us a long time to figure out, but what, like one of the things that really benefit in the conversation. Tanya, I see your hand up.
I noticed that the image that I got is, well, what you got, I believe, is presence. You were present as well as she was present. You're both present, open, and exploring. It's like looking at this thing, taking a moment to really be present and look at this thing, which we don't often get much opportunity to do, to examine and explore something in an open way.
And Tanya, I'm curious, like, what do you think helped me do that? Like, what do you think my focus, like, if you were to guess, like, what was my focus that helped me to stay in that? Because it's so easy to get off on.
Oh, you're focused on her 100%.
Yeah. And I, what I tell people is even more like, it's focused on Jen, but it's actually focused on that specific story that like, is because like oftentimes we ask somebody like, hey, how did it, how did your event go in the last 2 days? And they say, good, fine. And that's the end of the conversation. But like when we articulate, here's what I'm looking for. When did that situation make you happy? Right? Or when did you feel the best in the situation, or any list of questions? I've identified what I'm looking for. And now for me, the thing that like really keeps me is like, I need the entire picture painted, like, and from that person's perspective, and not just the physical picture, but the internal picture. And I can't take any, and it's that person's picture, not mine. So I have to like fill in the details. Like notice Jen said joy, and I could have easily said, oh yeah, like put my definition on her painting, right? But to say like, what is joy all about? What does that feel? How do you know? And the cool thing is, like, if you notice, like right after I asked the question about joy, what happened with Jen? Did anybody see that part or remember that part? Yeah, she gave us that like super infectious laugh, right? Like, and what's interesting is that like, had I not challenged that assumption, I wouldn't have got that experience, right? Like people need us to invite them to tell the story, right? And it's this counterintuitive thing, like Jen's never going to offer that story if somebody doesn't ask, because it will feel a lot like I'm boasting, or I'm right. Like there's an awkward feeling of like, let me tell you how good of a mother I am. Like that's a good way to get uninvited to the party, right? but there is something that is powerful about like when someone is asked about that authentically, that like, oh, I get to share this not because I'm boasting, but because like, right, this is something I care deeply about. Bree, what were you going to say?
So Brian, I have a question for you, because so we've got comments in here of Janine pointed out that Jen lit up, and you shared in that experience. Lisa said she lit up like a Christmas tree. How did it feel for you to help Jen feel that way?
I like it. No, it's a really good question, and now I don't have a damn answer. No, but the in the I so often liken this to like again, like watching the movie. Like if you're the person that asks a lot of questions during the movie, this is the perfect process for you, because now you get to do it on purpose. It's only the other person in the movie. It's that skill set. I am not that person. I get really annoyed when people make any noises while I'm watching a movie, right? But in that moment, like when, and so a little bit of like, I've been doing this for quite a while, like literally thousands of these conversations. That moment for me, I always hear the same thing in the back of my head. Oh, there they are. And what I mean by that is like for the first 3 or 4 questions, like Jen was being honest. She wasn't trying to hide anything, but all of us are like, here's like, there's different like layers that I'm going to let you see, right? All of us have that. It's a natural protective, right? We need to have that. Otherwise people will just, run off on top of us all the time. But like, especially when you're getting into what people care about, what they think they did well, that is behind a few layers of defenses. We don't let everybody see that, because we've all had the experience of like saying out loud, I care about this, I'm good at this, and have it tacitly rejected. And those moments stay with us, and therefore we get really defensive about sharing. And so when Jen like opened up, and it felt it like there was a feeling before of like, oh, she really wants to tell this. Like, I want her to tell the whole thing. Like, you know what I mean? And I don't know if you felt that, Jen, or not, but like, oh, it was joy. And I was like, oh, geez, there's more of a story. And like, when the laughing came out, I was like, it just, for me, it's almost relaxing. Like, oh, wow. Like there's something of like, this person is showing me who they are. And that's a really, there's a humility in that, right? Like I try not to respond to it one way or the other. Not try like, that's awesome, or judge it, because I just want to accept it. Right? Because if I get really excited about that, then it encourages the person to perform again. If I judge it, again, it'll encourage the person to back off. But if I just accept it and I stay curious in it, then I get more of it, right?
Yep,
Yeah.
I love that. And you mentioned, so it's a vulnerable thing for us to say, I'm a good mom, and to like open up about joy and what that feels like. So I'm curious, Jen, if you're up for sharing, what was it in the process that made you comfortable to respond to those questions?
I think the continued line of not really adding or editing, or I can't remember the term that you used earlier, no feedback, SOFA, right? It's this idea of I'm inviting you to tell the story. And I mean, I get very happy about my daughter because I love her a lot, and I love being a parent, and I know that it's the most important job and the hardest that I've ever had. And so I feel very passionately about doing it well, and having that moment, being able to talk about it is important, because I think too often we don't give ourselves permission to say, I'm doing a good job.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
did that feel like Brian gave you permission to say that?
1000%.
Okay. Oh, that's cool. Nice.
And without getting too far into the science on this, like that is what you described there is why, like Vivek Murthy, our Surgeon General, there's a book called Together, why he defines, like he says connection to our brains is as important as food and water. And I like, there's the whole, like our whole transformational listening program is based on this concept. Like really, we spent a lot of time in like, what is connection actually doing? What does that actually mean? And that instance where I'm able to show you what I care about, and what I care about now has value to the other person. That's where connection happens. And because of that, we're actually not designed to do that alone. That like, yes, like my wife is a counselor, and we went back and forth on this a long time, and self-validation is important, but self-validation is a survival mechanism. You can survive on self-validation. You cannot thrive on self-validation. Your brain is simply not designed for it. We are designed to help each other see each other. Like that is, and it took me it took me a few years to like get as concrete as I am right now about that. Like that moment of like, I care about this. This is what made me happy. This is what brought me joy. This is what I worked on. This is what was meaningful to me. We have to have other people to share that with. And specifically, we have to have other people that are interested in it. Like that, like and that sounds counterintuitive, but there's a real beauty in that design, right? That like I can be of help to someone without having the intention of helping. And perhaps the most help I am is like knowing how to like find the value in the person's story, because then I'm not there trying to like make you feel better. We're both realizing we're both benefiting from the interaction, right? Yeah. And that like that moment of connection, we call it, that moment of somebody else sharing, what I register in the back of my head is that person's less lonely now. And 75% of the country is lonely right now, right? Again, that same book, like that's the #1 health epidemic in the country, bar none. And that's not my words, that's the Surgeon General of the US, right? Yeah. And so on the base level of this, that's what we do. But now we get to do it in a sales interaction. We get to do it at work in a performance review. We get it like there's so many, like every interaction, there's an opportunity to uncover and understand and connect on the story that people care about. And not only is there an opportunity, but it's vital that we do that because it's in such absolute short supply. 12:30, Bree, let's do another round, shall we? And what I'm thinking is, I haven't done it in a while. And so like the moment I thought about it, it sounded uncomfortable. And you know, my thoughts on that, that means like, I guess I have to do that. So
am I asking you the question?
That's what I was, yeah,
Okay.
we haven't done it in a while, right? Like, and I just so everybody else's know, Bree's favorite thing to do when asking me these questions is what, Bree?
I like to make you cry.
Yeah. Yeah. We say that in jest, but just like Jen had that laughing experience, what we see a lot is somebody will have an emotional response because of how like that moment of actually sharing yourself is like, it's so powerful for some people. And we always talk about the first 6 months we were doing the experiment. I saw more 50-year-old white guys crying than I've ever seen in my life. And they had no idea that they were just like, I need to ask better questions. I don't talk enough. And next thing you know, they're crying about their 5-year-old. And I'm like, oh, there you go, bud. Yeah. And they came back. That's what blew my mind. But Hillary had their hands up. You're on mute again. Oh, nope, still on mute. There you go.
Just a quick comment, because so much is gelling for me right now. And I work as a mediator to basically, my term, monosyllabic male youth who are being shunted out of the court system. So my focus, I just sort of landed being really comfortable and good in it. And I use different words, but the whole piece of the being seen, right? Being seen and heard. And more often than not, I'm working with people, with young people for whom that is a rarity, right? And that's the transformational mediation. And occasionally you get them and they are effing mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Because of the shift, but it is all comes out of the being heard, being seen.
Yeah.
And just thank you for helping me put that language on it, because it just focuses it in a way that is more conscious, and it was more intuitive before.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And we hear that, and actually that's what we tell people a lot. Like, everybody knows what connection feels like. Everybody knows how important it is. But like consistently creating it is what we all struggle with. And that really, the whole thing we designed is really about like, hey, what if we actually get the science that shows us, and then we can create some models for doing it more consistently. So I've distracted enough, Bree. I'll let you go ahead.
All right, awesome. Let me get my timer up. We're going for 4 minutes. All right, cool. So Brian.
Yeah.
What put a smile on your face this week?
It's funny. You'd think I would have had an answer ready, but I don't. So yeah, I met with when I went to Denver last week, I met with a buddy that I hadn't seen in 3 years, and we had just a really great conversation. 3 years ago, both of us were drinking. Both of us are sober now, and we've had just, quite the 3 years respectively. And we were just able to have a conversation that I don't know would have been available 5 years ago. Yeah.
So what part of that, or what about that experience with your friend put a smile on your face?
So it's actually seeing him. I didn't get to see his daughter, and I was for the first 3 or 4 years, I was around his daughter all the time, like just this beautiful girl. And we would, I used to run with him, and we'd take the kid, and she was so gregarious, and just to hear his stories and how his life has been made so much better because of his daughter, and not just because of his daughter, but because he has made the choice to prioritize his daughter, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and just it was just really neat to see him be himself, and just to kind of have that experience of like, oh, 2 40-year-old dudes talking about, relatively sappy stuff, but in a way that like, we don't feel like we're forcing it, right? Like, and just to, yeah, it was just cool to like, neither of us felt awkward in it, if you will. Yeah.
How do you know? Like, how do you know that he was being his true self? How do you know that you guys weren't awkward in it?
Yeah, the upside of this particular friend is he would have told me. So we've always kind of had that honesty, and me the same. And I feel like, I don't know if it's like getting older, I have less patience, but like, I don't, if I'm not interested in the conversation, I'll invite myself out, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly. And we just stayed in the conversation, and just like, if I like tactical signs, like he was leaning in, and yeah, and he was also asking questions about, you know, a lot happened in my life in the last 3 years that he got to hear all at once. And there was this kind of just nice little ebb and flow of the conversation, I guess.
You said that you both wanted to stay in the conversation. Why did you want to stay in it?
I think it was, yeah, it's really interesting. Like for me, it was like, can we be these new people who we are and actually like stay with each other, right? Like, you know, like you go up in life and somebody leaves and comes back, and like, you know, you wonder if you can connect. And it was, even though we're fundamentally different people than we were when we first, you know, hung out, it's like we were able to kind of see some of the like, oh, here's actually the things that brought us together despite all these other things we did together, right? Yeah. And having
Just
that,
hit 4 minutes, and man, I had a doozy of a follow-up question.
so one of parts of this, just to reference what Bree said, is that in the finding good sessions, we have 10 minutes. And when it hits 10 minutes, it's 10 minutes. And one of the reasons we do that is like to really try to, you know, like there's questions you can get to the core quicker. And it's really like that practice of like, oh, I'm actually asking some really safe questions here, you know, and pulling, it's like, I don't have much time. And I like that because we don't have time, right? Like realistically, you know, like I was lucky to have a few hours with a friend the other week, but most conversations, most opportunities for connection aren't what they were 40 years ago. You have 10 minutes, you have a half hour, you have 5 minutes. And so like being able to hone in on like, oh, what's the thing I'm actually looking to ask this person is a practice. It takes skill. Yeah. Bree, I'll let you guide the questions from here.
Okay, so I'm curious what folks noticed in the conversation that I had with Brian.
Megan, good. I see your hand.
Hello. So I noticed that, and this might be a little like too abstract, but I noticed that there was a current, that kind of like there was a fear of catching the current when you were coming towards each other again. Like, have I changed too much to have that same connection? And then once you were in it, it's like, let this river never end. And almost the connection with that current and finding that flow, and that almost allows you to echo back to an older version while being true to yourself, plays really nicely. As well as I noticed as a facilitator, also being the one to have these vulnerable aspects shared. Right after, it's back to a very controlled response. Oh, there's a reason why we do this, why we have this boundary here. And it like allows this reset to reorient, even though Bree's leading the rest of the facilitation of this. It's like, okay, and almost like a self-coping, like just, I allowed myself this freedom and now I'm back at work.
Yeah. And I really appreciate like Megan, like the identification of that. It was something that actually took me a bit of time. Like people kept saying, well, you have to be vulnerable on the call. And I was like, no, these are positively oriented questions. Like vulnerability is asking like, what's the bad thing that happened when you were a kid? And what we discovered is that there's actually almost a deeper level of vulnerability that happens by sharing the things you care about.
Yeah.
And what we discovered is like, it's easier to walk into a group and say, oh, can you believe this happened? Like I use a rain analogy. It's raining outside and I come in and say, oh, can you believe the rain? And it's such a pain in the neck, versus like walking inside and saying, I love the rain. It's so refreshing and it's 35 degrees and raining outside. And it just brightens my day. Like that second response opens you to criticism at a much higher degree than, right? So because we have these negative biases, it's easier to connect on that. And so like yes, pulls me in the conversation into a vulnerable space. And so like that reset is almost like recognizing it, like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm gonna go back over here, right? Yeah, and
More,
oh, go ahead. Yep.
it builds more safety and opportunity for that, because then you can get into the vulnerability faster as you expand on that shifting skill, using that reorientation at the end to be like, okay, the container, and knowing that that's there is also really helpful.
Yeah.
Doing a lot of facilitation myself, I see that, and it almost folds back to a point that you made earlier about I don't remember if it was self-worth or self-validation, but when we're sharing these positive, vulnerable aspects, we might have this internal self-worth about it.
Mhm.
But if that gets mirrored to the opposite, where that gets cut down, that's a very dangerous thing when we are vulnerable, especially when we might be holding on to only a couple of these grounding points. To give the opportunity to lose that grounding point is one of the fundamental things that I think we get away from in our connections.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Megan. And I like when I hear that, it's and just for Hillary's sake, I taught for 4 years in a juvenile corrections facility, and there was a whole using questions. I have a TED talk on there that was all about the questions part. But like, what happens when we share the thing we care about and it gets put back in our face, you can hear it in language, because now we say we don't care about things, that it doesn't matter to us, that it's not important to us, right? And there's some things that authentically don't matter to us and that we don't care about, but like we tend to start saying those things in the places that we actually care, right?
Yeah.
Right. And it's just saying, like, you start to hear it differently. I don't care about that is really just a way of saying, I'm not going to let you into that. Right.
Mhm.
I'm not going to put myself out there and be vulnerable. And so there's a sort of a side thing on here in terms of like how we approach these conversations, that like, I have to remove my expectation of how much you're going to share.
Yeah. And if you look at it as a math equation, it's like not both sides are equal. How someone's facial expressions versus emotion, all of these factors on both sides are not equal, and we have to be aware of where we are in that power dynamic.
Yeah, I love the math equation. That's a visual we need to create, right, Bree? I've taken over again. Keep going with the question. Sorry, Bree.
Good. Jen, you took yourself off mute.
As someone who's recently had a tremendous breakthrough with math, I love the idea of taking a conversation about listening into an equation. I'm so excited about that. I had to say something.
Nice. And then another thing that you commented on, Jen, in our chat was that Brian was vulnerable about not knowing the answer. So something that we highly encourage when having these conversations is that we don't need to know the answer as the respondee. First off, we're exploring how many times are we having conversations like these on a regular basis? These are not typical conversations. So we're digging into places that we probably haven't dug into before. And for that person to be able to say, I'm not sure, is like almost, I don't want to say a goal of these conversations, but that's like, oh man, I'm on the right track with these conversations, because this person now is exploring a side of themselves that they've never explored before. So they have the opportunity now to think a little bit about it and potentially explore it with you. So that whole I don't know response or silence in response is actually a fabulous thing for the respondee. I'll mention on the other side of it, it didn't really happen in this situation, but sometimes it's a struggle to come up with the next question.
Hmm.
That is okay as well. We can say, I'm trying to think about what my next question should be. It might take a second. And because I'm curious, if someone were to say that to you, how would that make you feel if they took pause to think about the next question that they were going to ask you?
Yeah, I want to ask you a question, but I don't know what question to ask. How does that sit on you? Like, what is your how would you respond if somebody said that to you? Like, what would you think? And anybody can answer.
Anybody?
Oh, Megan, go ahead. Megan's got a hand up.
I don't want to talk too much, but I love that. And I'm very fortunate in my community. Like I have some really deep thinkers that I talk with, and we do have the opportunity to go, wait, hold on, like that comes up, and like I find it challenging for me to do that, to hold enough space for the pause. Yet when it happens, I'm so grateful for it, because like my nature is to fill that space. I just did in my own sentence, like, but when it happens and when you're really present for it, when you're on that river and that current is holding the space and you let go of holding the space for each other, it is held in that connection. That's when that pause gets welcome, even in my natural state of filling the pause. And that is just such a restorative interaction.
And I'm going to make a somewhat educated assumption, Megan, that you are an extrovert. Would that be a fair assumption?
I go both ways really, really hard. Like,
so what we find in the pause is that like extroverts, it's like trying to push a mountain over. Like, it's like, hey, just stay there in the silence and let them think. And they're like, I gotta, like, they're so uncomfortable with the silence. But like what happens is you start doing that with your introvert friends who process a little more purposefully. Like, notice I didn't say slowly, because it's not about intelligence. Actually, like, they're much more purposeful processors. And when you give them permission to like, yeah, it's cool. Like, take a couple of seconds to figure out a question, or like, I'm not sure, it actually gives them permission to be that. Like, it was one of the, it's really neat to see, like, the first time you try that with an introvert, because they're just like, they damn near hug you. Yeah. Hillary.
Yeah.
Oh, mute again.
Sorry about that. I just had to run with the current in the river a little bit, also being a canoeist. And there's a bunch of lovely life analogies with this one. And when the pause occurs and somebody's like, I'm needing to think of that question, the image for me is that you've pulled off into an eddy on the river, right? And people know the basics. You got the river current, and eddy is where it's kind of twirling and doing nothing, and it's a calm spot. And that's where you study the next part of the river. I'm little white watery bits, right? Like lumps and rocks and stuff. And so for me, just that image of you pull off into the eddy, because if somebody is actually taking the time to mull and come up with that right question from kind of a heart-mind perspective, gobsmacked is a good word, like, that's a lot of space. It's, that is such an intention, and like, I'm running out of adjectives, but it's such a huge, solid, like, oh my God, I am worth somebody's pausing and thinking about what is going to be a good question for me to further explore whatever.
Mm-hmm. And as a fellow river, I'm whitewater rafting. What I love about the eddy analogy is, like, you pull out to an eddy to look at the upcoming rapids because it's a safety move.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's really about, it's making sure that, like, yes, we're here to have fun, but we're also, like, first and foremost, it's about safety. And it like, that's one of the most critical pieces, like, that we have to drill in over and over again. Even with folks that are further down this certification, like, it always comes back to safety. What we're trying to, connection is about, does someone see my value? And to do that, it has to be safe enough to share, right? And that, like, that safety component is your brain's number one mechanism. Like, your brain is looking for safety 7 times a second. Your eyeball, and it is so critical, but it's happening subconsciously. It's not, we're not thinking about it, but, like, once you start to see it, Like you can see that move, like Jen, there was a laughing piece, but if you go back through in the recording, you'll notice in the first 3 questions, there's a change in her position. And that's what like over time, you're just training yourself to see that like just a lean forward is saying we're creating safety, right? Just so you can see it in the eyeballs, like you see like, oh, there's some pupil dilation here. The shoulders get softer, there's a move in. And what we're doing is having this conversation while we're regulating safety, but what we're unconsciously doing, what we're almost intuitively doing is like managing that safety dynamic. And that's where like the beauty of like Brie and I have had this conversation back and forth, you know, done this with each other back and forth so many times that like I can like she can and I can like almost second nature, like oh we found a vein there, let's dive in, here we go, you know, because we like, and then you take the cues as they're given. And I think what's cool about that is like that's the design. Like we're not manipulating anything here, we're not creating anything, we're actually doing the thing we're naturally designed to do. Like this is how we were biologically adapted to communication and to do the thing that mammals, but specifically Homo sapiens, do, has allowed us to flourish as a group, and that's to connect on story. Right, to actually like create that safety with each other when our brain is naturally looking at each other as a potential threat, right? Where are we at with time? 12:54. So 5 minutes left or so. Love to hear insights, comments, or any other questions. And so I'm reading here. So the pause also tells the other, care enough to get this right and to keep this space safe. Yep, 100%. Yeah, I'm not just going to throw in any question here. I'm going to take a moment to ask you the right one, or the, you know what I mean? Like I am curious about something, but I really want to think through so that I know that I'm asking the thing that's actually of interest and importance. Yeah, and you just hit it on the head. I'm telling you, you're important. I'm telling you that it matters, right? And I don't just uncomfortable words, right? Yeah, like I don't have to tell my friend, I'm telling you, I'm trying to keep it safe for you, and I want to tell you you matter. Like that's awkward for me, but I can say the same thing in the pause, right? Yeah. Megan, go ahead.
Well, with that, in just creating a pause, if someone is very extroverted and is used to that constant feedback, or is just part of the acculturation where it's a lot of talking over and things like that, and the pause isn't available just in a natural conversation, it's important to state that. And that also provides the safety there too. So it's not just the silence of the pause, but like, hey, I'm really thinking this over, because if you're not used to that, if you've never experienced it, it probably will feel more like abandonment than presence, because it's like, okay, you're just zoning out now.
Yeah, and what you're outlining there, Megan, is like so much of the process is like, how do we get permission? How do we make it safe? And that's certainty, right? So here's what I'm doing, right? And notice like in the lead up with the conversation with Jen, like, hey, I might ask you some questions and it's cool if you don't want to answer, right? That's really about making that, so like being transparent and making that safety, right? Jen,
I will tell you that made me more willing to be vulnerable, by the way. The fact that you said it's okay if you don't want to be.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And such a, like, that is such probably the number one thing we have to like train people sometimes in the beginning is if your intention is to have a deep conversation, you have just kind of messed the conversation up. Because now you have an expectation of where they're going to go, what story they're going to share. The expectation is that I want to hear the story that's important to you. Maybe that's a deep conversation. Maybe that's a, comical conversation. Maybe that's a story of inspiration, or maybe it's a story of, right? But I'm interested in your story because your story has value. But when I put the expectation in that, oh, we're going to have a deep conversation, like I've actually put that person into a more defensive position. Because like, now I have to, I'm asking them to perform for me. Right. And I know that's not our intention. It's certainly not what we've, because what we're actually looking for, what we want is the connection underneath. But like, if we view connection as only having a deep conversation, then we're only looking at connection on our terms in that specific instance. And connection, what we're finding is that like, it's available in the simplest conversations, right? With there's no deep neuroscience in the what made you smile in this last week, even though there is, right? But I mean, like once you know what's all behind that and follow, there is a lot of science in there, but it doesn't take, it's simply like, hey, can I ask you questions for 5 minutes because I'm really interested in what made you smile this week? Right? Like just that simple. And that's not me trying to help you. That's me trying to, right? Like I'm asking for your story because I know the story is going to affect me. Right. So it's complexingly, is that a word? Complexingly? No, it's not. I made that up. But it's super complex, but it's actually like the actual application can be very simple once you get past the complexity. I did the second one, made sense. Anyway, we are right about an hour. We have a couple minutes left, but I want to say, I know a lot of you have to jump right on the top of the hour. So I'd like to appreciate y'all for showing up. Anybody that's listening on the line, thank you. What we're hoping to do on these weekly conversations is again, just showing you how in a simple conversation, you can create some pretty, what we call transformational experiences with people, and that like connection is closer than we've also often been led to believe if we're willing to change the way we listen. And for all of you on here, all of you listening, really encourage you to go on findinggood.com and jump on we have a community. It's free for 2 weeks. It's tons of resources and guides for like, here's questions you can ask. We're trying to add more things to that every week. You can join a live Finding Good call as part of that membership, and it's $5 a month after that 2 week. And that whole area is, here's where the better conversations happen. And we do it at $5 a month because we think everybody should have access to that. For those wanting to like actually go and use this to transform businesses, to work with clients, to work with kids, then we have the transformational listening certification program that's available. It's outlined right now as a facilitator. We're adjusting that, and that's a 6-month program that we really get in the weeds and give you the transformational listening course, the FIRES course, and a few coaching sessions in there. So if you want any information about that, feel free to reach out to myself or Bree or Amber. Go to findinggood.com, and appreciate y'all for showing up and doing a little work to create more connection in the world. And with that, I'm going to end the recording, but I'll hang out for a couple of minutes to answer any questions. All right. Take care. Thanks, everybody.